In this video, we explore 3 of the creepiest unsolved mysteries that continue to send chills down the spines of those who hear them. So sit back, turn down the lights, and join us as we dive into the unknown. On the afternoon of September 15, 1992, an eerie incident took place at the Target department store in the quiet town of Pine River, Oregon. The employees and shoppers initially didn't pay much attention to a little boy wandering around alone. However, as time passed, it became clear that no guardian or family member was accompanying him. The boy moved silently through the store, his eyes vacant, as though he was lost in deep thought, yet he made no sound. When the store staff attempted to speak with him, he remained silent. His face reflected a strange mix of fear and confusion. After repeatedly asking him questions, he finally said just one chilling sentence: "Daddy is in the trees." The words sent chills through everyone who heard them. No one could understand what the boy meant. The police arrived, took the boy from the store, and placed him in the care of local child services. However, communication with him proved challenging. He was very young, and what little he said was vague and unsettling. In an attempt to identify him, the police published his photo in the local paper. A few days later, a woman named Samuel Henderson came forward and identified the child. She said his name was Tyler and that he was her grandson. Samuel took Tyler into her custody, but she quickly noticed that the boy was acting strangely. He didn't want to play or speak. Whenever anyone tried to talk to him, he would just sit quietly, as though he was processing something deep inside but unable to express it. The reasons for his behavior were still a mystery. Just days before Tyler was found, his parents, Matthew and Sarah, had gone on a small trip. They had ventured into the Cedar Ridge forest for a camping getaway. Since then, they had been missing without a trace. The day before Tyler was found wandering alone in the Target store was the last time anyone had seen Matthew and Sarah alive. After that, they simply vanished. As the police investigation continued, the most pressing questions remained unanswered. How had Tyler ended up at the store alone? How did he get separated from his parents, and what had truly happened to his parents? Tyler's haunting sentence, "Daddy is in the trees," was a phrase that continued to puzzle investigators. Nearly 2 months later, deep in the forest, a group of hikers discovered an abandoned car. Inside, they found bloodstains and signs of a struggle. Nearby, under a tree, they came across Matthew's body. He had been brutally murdered, but there was no sign of Sarah. The question now was, how did Tyler make it to the store, which was so far from the forest? Someone must have driven him there, but who? Imagine the chilling possibility. Tyler had likely sat in a car for that long drive with the very person who might have killed his parents. The child was too young to say much, but could he have seen something? Perhaps those terrifying moments left a deep imprint on his fragile mind, but he was too small to fully comprehend or remember clearly. Tyler might have been a witness to his parents' final moments, but his childlike mind struggled to grasp the events. His lone statement, "Daddy is in the trees," could have been his only way of expressing the fear and confusion he experienced. As time passed, Samuel began to notice more unsettling behaviors in Tyler. He frequently woke up screaming from nightmares, his eyes wide with terror. On several occasions, he muttered in his sleep, "They're hiding in the trees, they're coming." No one could understand what horrors he was reliving in his dreams. Months turned into years, but there was still no trace of Sarah. Despite the police's efforts, her whereabouts remained a mystery. The case gradually went cold and the townspeople began to forget. But Tyler couldn't forget. What he had witnessed as a child stayed with him, growing more disturbing as he got older. As Tyler grew up, the shadow of that day in the forest never left him. He couldn't share his feelings with anyone. Then, one day, when he was 16, he suddenly asked his grandmother, "Will Mom ever come back?" The question hit Samuel like a punch to the gut. After all these years, the absence of his mother was still a deep, unanswered wound in Tyler's heart. A few days later, Tyler made a decision. He would go back to Cedar Ridge, the place where his parents were last seen alive, to find the answers he had been seeking. Despite Samuel's protests, Tyler was determined. He felt that somehow all the answers to his questions were hidden in that forest. One afternoon, Tyler ventured into the forest. The daylight was beginning to fade and the trees seemed to grow darker and more imposing. He walked and walked, eventually reaching the spot where Matthew's body had been found. But even now, deep in the woods, Tyler found no answers. The place had changed over the years, yet an eerie sensation gripped him. It was as if something was watching him, lurking just beyond his vision. Tyler couldn't shake the feeling that his mother was still nearby, somewhere in the trees, hiding in the shadows. But there was no proof, just an empty, hollow sense of loss. As Tyler was preparing to leave, something caught his eye. Hanging from a tree branch was an old piece of fabric. His breath caught in his throat. He knew that fabric. It belonged to his mother. His belief solidified in his mind. But how had the fabric remained on that branch for so many years? And why had Tyler only found it now after all this time? The mystery deepened. As he pulled the fabric down, a note slipped out from its folds. It read, "I've always been with you, Tyler. I've been hiding in the trees. You'll never find me." The note sent a fresh wave of terror and confusion through Tyler. He realized that the biggest mystery of his life remained unsolved, and that the forest seemed to hold an unsettling, inexplicable connection to his past. To this day, no one knows who killed Tyler's parents or where Sarah disappeared to. But Tyler knows one thing for sure. Somewhere, hidden deep within the trees, lies the truth. And that truth is darker and more elusive than anyone could ever imagine. The summer night of 1990 in Seattle seemed peaceful, yet hidden beneath the surface was something far more sinister. Laura Johnson, a 22-year-old college student, and her 21-year-old boyfriend Eric Martinez were full of excitement that evening. Eric had just returned home from Stanford University for summer break, and over the past few months their relationship had blossomed. But what started as a night full of life and hope would soon spiral into a nightmare beyond imagination. On the evening of August 22nd, Laura, Eric, and Laura's younger brother, Ben, decided to enjoy dinner at a popular local restaurant. Ben, eager for a fun night, had no idea of the horrors that lay ahead. After their meal, they decided to drive out to a secluded park on the outskirts of the city to make the most of the warm summer night. The park was far enough away from the city lights that it seemed like an oasis of calm and quiet, a place where the world stood still. They arrived at the park and found a quiet, isolated spot to park the car. Eric, driving his silver Toyota Corolla, turned on the cassette player, leaned back in his seat, and let the cool night air drift through the open windows. Laura and Eric relaxed in the comfort of the moment, blissfully unaware that they were not alone. About 20 minutes passed when Laura heard something rustling near the back of the car. At first, she thought it might be an animal or a stray, but as the sound grew louder, she realized this was no ordinary disturbance. Eric sat up and looked out the window, only to see a shadowy figure moving toward them with alarming speed. In the darkness, they couldn't make out the person's face, but the menace in their movements was unmistakable. Eric instinctively reached to lock the car doors, but before he could, the stranger was already at the vehicle. Armed with a large, menacing knife, the attacker immediately lunged toward Eric. In a desperate attempt to protect Laura, Eric fought back, but the attacker overpowered him, slamming him to the ground before turning on Laura. Her terrified screams echoed through the car as the night descended into pure chaos. What followed was more brutal than anyone could have imagined. The attacker, cold and calculated, tied Eric up and dragged Laura from the car. Eric's throat was slashed so deeply that he was nearly decapitated. The attacker then took them to a remote wooded area where their bodies were discarded as if they were nothing. Laura's lifeless body was found near a pile of decaying wood, her hands bound and her throat viciously cut. Scattered around her were her clothes and, inexplicably, a large sum of money. An eerie, unexplained detail that left investigators baffled. When police arrived on the scene, they discovered a blood-soaked car interior, Laura's belongings strewn across the floor, and, in a chilling twist, a set of golf clubs and golf balls arranged meticulously inside the car. It was as if the killer had left a calling card, a macabre display designed to confuse and disturb. The investigation took a strange turn as detectives found no clear motive. Eric's watch and wallet were left untouched, ruling out robbery. The golf clubs and balls added another bizarre layer to the case, suggesting a premeditated and highly orchestrated crime. But who was the killer? Why had they targeted Laura and Eric, and what did the money signify? Despite a thorough investigation, the case went cold. No fingerprints, no suspects, no clear answers. Laura Johnson and Eric Martinez's brutal murders remain an unsolved mystery to this day. That quiet summer night in Seattle turned into a horror story that would forever stain the city's history, a grim reminder that even in moments of peace, darkness can lurk just out of sight. To this day, their murders remain one of Seattle's most chilling cold cases, a shadow that hangs over the city's past. The mystery of who killed Laura and Eric continues to haunt the memories of those who knew them, as well as anyone who dares to remember that fateful night. Last summer, my family and I moved to a secluded 100-acre property deep in a Mississippi valley. The estate was surrounded by a dense, untamed forest, far from the nearest town. At first, we believed this peaceful solitude would bring tranquility to our lives, but little did we know that an ominous presence lurked within the quiet of the woods. One night, around 1 a.m., I was standing on our porch, enjoying the cool night air. There was an unsettling stillness all around, the kind that makes you feel like something is watching from the shadows. Suddenly, that eerie silence was broken. Out of nowhere, I heard the unmistakable sound of a live concert echoing through the trees. The music was shockingly loud, as if it were right nearby. It felt as though the ground beneath me was vibrating with the beat of drums, and I could even hear the cheers and applause of an audience. Most disturbing of all was the song playing, "Ho Hey" by the Lumineers. That song held a special place in my heart. It was my sister's favorite, and she had left our house earlier that same morning. My wife, who was in the kitchen, rushed out and asked, "Do you hear that?" We stood there in disbelief. How could there be a concert happening so late at night in the middle of nowhere? Our nearest neighbor was miles away, and there were no events or towns nearby that could explain the sound. Curiosity got the better of us, and we jumped into the car to track down the source. As we drove about 300 feet from the house, the music suddenly stopped, just like that. Silence again. It was as if the sound had been confined to the perimeter of our property. The forest around us was dense and wild, without any signs of civilization. We briefly considered venturing into the woods, but something deep inside warned us not to. The trees seemed darker than usual, the shadows longer and more menacing. It felt as though if we stepped any further, we might not come back. Reluctantly, we turned the car around and headed back home. Once inside, we sat in silence, discussing what had just happened, our minds racing with unanswered questions. After a while, we stepped back onto the porch, and just like that, the music was gone, as if it had never been there in the first place. The whole experience lasted no more than 15 minutes, but it left a deep, unsettling mark on both of us, especially since that particular song, "Ho Hey," was so intimately connected to my sister, who had left us just that day. I'm not usually someone who buys into paranormal experiences, but that night made me question everything. How could a song so personal to us suddenly emerge from the depths of the forest? Since that night, our lives have changed. We no longer entertain the idea of spending nights out in the forest, and we're constantly on edge, listening for any strange sounds. The forest, once a source of peace, has now become a place of fear, a haunting presence that looms over our property. We haven't been able to find any rational explanation for what happened that night. And while no one else seems to believe us, we know what we heard. The invisible concert in the woods has become a part of our lives, something we can never forget. It's a mystery that we may never solve, but one that will forever linger in our memories, haunting the quiet nights in the Mississippi Valley.